Hey everyone, today I am recording an event report that's long overdue for the battles at Maker Faire Orlando. This was a 2-day event at the Orlando Maker Faire with robots ranging from 150 grams all the way up to 220 pounds. And it was the first multi-day robot event I've been to in quite a long time, which was pretty exciting. I ended up bringing 3 insect weight robots, and they were all kind of built at the last minute. I had my 150 gram bot Electric Eye, which was basically a similar design to how it was previously with the fork lifter, but I had put it all inside of a BattleBots Toys Bronco body to make it look kind of like Bronco with a fork, I guess. I had Jack Chop back here, which is a vertical spinner using the disc I've used for quite a while now. Actually a very similar setup to Box of Scraps, which was the first robot I built when I kind of got back into doing robots. And then there on the right is Sawin, which is a 3-pound based around the Fingertech Robotics Egg Beater kit. Both the electronic kit and the weapon kit itself were used for this robot. So as far as insect weight bots go, beetles were the only small ones run on Saturday, so I had a whole day just to focus on this guy here. And ended up going 2-2 for the event. The first fight was against a robot called Drumroll, which as the name implies was also using a drum style weapon. That robot had a 3D printed body, and when the fight started I actually got some really good hits on him. The weapon was working really well. I'm actually really impressed with how nicely this kit worked. I mean, I'm a little ashamed that I bought a kit, but it did its job well. I really didn't have much time to work on the robot and build the robot the way I wanted to do it, so I kind of compromised with myself and went this direction. But I got some good hits in, ripped off some of that 3D printed plastic. But then I started to have an issue. For my drive, I was using the 1000 RPM gear motors that are used in a lot of 3-pound robots. I'd previously used them in Neanderthal Roomba, but I'd mated them to small brushless motors with a reversible ESC. And in testing it, it worked pretty nicely, but as the fight went on and impacts were transferred through, the pinion gears on one side started to go, and then by the end of the fight, we were actually both on opposite sides of the arena, and he had stopped moving, and quite honestly, so did I. I lost drive on both sides by the end of the fight, and fortunately they were counting him out before that happened. So I was kind of in panic mode after that fight, so I had to rush back to my pit table and swap out the motors. I had the old Silver Sparks that I'd run in Gorgor. I had those handy. I tossed them in this spot just so that I'd have drive. My next fight was against a robot called Tsunami, which is a pretty simple little wedge bot. His armor seemed to be pretty thin, either tin or aluminum, and I got some really good hits in on him. Eventually took his wheel off and then he tapped out. Short, sweet, and pretty destructive there. My third fight was against Project Terminus, and this is a robot I'd seen before, and was actually one of the ones I was pretty worried about going into this competition. Project Terminus has 4 low skirts with a horizontal spinning bar on top. I did do some tests before this fight to make sure that I actually worked inverted, and I'm glad I did because the little front pieces here would actually keep me from running inverted, especially with my drive motors being lowered due to the way I attached them versus the way the brushless motors were actually put into the chassis. So for a little while enough I was able to go hit for hit with Project Terminus. I have this little wedge piece down here on the side. It's actually one of the arms off of Gorgor, and right now it's running a little high, but during that fight it was actually running pretty close to the ground and was able to get under his skirts and toss him up in the air a couple times. I think I might have actually been hitting his weapon. I'm not entirely sure, but he hit me a few times and flipped me. I was able to smack into him. And towards the end of the fight, I actually had him kind of in line with the pit. I kept hitting him. I was tossing him up in the air. Not much, but just enough that he was breaking traction and moving ever closer to the pit. And then his blade caught me at the wrong angle, tossed me across the ring, and I honestly don't know what happened. The robot just stopped working. I went back to the pit table, tore everything apart. Still have no clue what actually happened. And that's always a bummer because you know it's going to happen again, but you don't know what to fix. I did take a little damage here on the front UHMW skid. I'm pretty sure this was Project Terminus. You can see cut pretty much all the way through the 1/2-inch UHMW here. So nice little battle scar he left me with. There are also some chunks taken out of the beater. I'm not entirely sure if that was him, but I'm kind of thinking it was. Someone's last fight was up against Dr. Horrible, which is another egg beater bot, very similar in design, except I don't think that one's a kit, so it's probably made with a lot better attention to detail. Unfortunately, that robot was able to get under Sawin every single time. Every time we went head to head, I lost. And something happened in between the Project Terminus fight and this fight, and I was no longer able to run inverted. If I was flipped, I was out. So I got flipped pretty early on. Dr. Horrible flipped me back over, got a couple more hits in, and then I ended up losing the weapon belts. Unfortunately, one thing I hadn't brought with me were spare bolts, and I had lost a bolt to the motor mount in between fights, and I did my best to get it to stay in one place, but the motor slowly shifted and kicked the belt off about halfway through this match. So after that, there was really nothing I could do, and I was pretty much doomed. So Sunday were the 150 gram bots and the 1 pound bots, at least for the divisions I was in. I only got one fight with Electric Eye. Electric Eye got torn to shreds by Pissed Off Unicorn. The fight started, we went at each other a couple times, and Pissed Off Unicorn ripped off both of my left wheels, both the driven wheel in the front and one of the toy wheels in back that I left on there. Then after a little while of me flailing around trying to stay in the game, he ripped the right drive motor completely out of the robot. I continued to flail around the arena, kind of using the fork to make the robot move just a little bit, kind of enjoying just how badly it was trashed, and eventually he got a really good hit in and sent me straight into the pit from across the ring. For reasons I'll talk about later, I didn't have an opportunity to have a second fight with Electric Eye, or I don't believe I did. I did try to rebuild it. Basically, to continue, I would have had to build an entire robot from scratch at the event, and that just didn't go the way I wanted it to. Last but not least, we have Jack Chop. Jack Chop went 1-1 at this event. I guess technically 1-2. My first fight was against Hamburger Helper, which was from the exact same team that had Drumroll that I'd had in my first match with Sawin. So it was kind of funny they got that team 2 days in a row as my first fight for a robot. It seemed like it was going really well for a minute. I was actually able to rip his Li-Poly battery out of his robot, which under normal circumstances I guess would have been enough to stop the fight since it's a big fire hazard, but the battery was still attached, and immediately after me knocking out of the robot, they used their 4-bar lifter to flip me over, and I hadn't realized that I wasn't actually invertible. So with Jack Chop on its back, I lost the fight. My second fight with Jack Chop was against a robot called Functioning Alcoholic, which is probably one of my favorite little robots from the event. The builder's beetle weight that he competed with on Saturday was knocked out pretty quickly, and I guess he had a lot of free time to drink and think of other robot ideas, and he decided to put the two together as a beer can flailing liquor bottles. I think there were some Legos thrown in the mix too. So I got one good hit on him, flipped him over pretty much immediately, and at the insistence of the crowd, I flipped him back over after trying to actually get the weapon to hit him in a way that would launch him back on his feet. And eventually I hit him again, flipping him over, and I kind of called it quits after that. I went to do a victory dance, thinking I had my invertibility issues fixed, only to end up flipping myself over on my back and finding out I actually really couldn't drive all that well upside down once again. So there was something I had to continue to work on and try to fix. Unfortunately, the event kind of ran long, and we ended up not having time to finish the ant weight and UK ant brackets. Electric Eye was no big deal because it was torn to shreds. So like I said, I'm not even sure if I would have had another opportunity to fight it. But Jack Chop was actually scheduled to go up against Critical Hit, which I've been trying to fight the members of that team for ever now. I think we did a grudge match a year ago at the 2015 Maker Faire Orlando event. But every time we've had an official matchup, we haven't actually gotten the fight. And I was ready to go jump into the match when it was announced. And even though the Functioning Alcoholic match was pretty much a cakewalk for me, I did, in similar fashion to Sawin, lose the screws that were holding my weapon motor in place. I actually ended up doing everything I could to just kind of zip tie the motor in place, which is hard with a spinning shell. But I don't think I was actually going to be able to get the weapon back up and functioning again. I was just going to go have the fight just to have the fight and hope maybe the weapon would kind of kick into gear. But when I heard they were canceling the rest of the ant-weight brackets and using another method to figure out who was going to win, I decided to just go and pack up, assuming I wasn't going to get my fight and knowing that I was kind of going to be wasting everybody's time anyway, with time being in such short supply, so I forfeit the match. I guess I actually could have had the fight if I wanted to, since we were both pretty much ready to go when the announcement was made. But like I said, I kind of felt selfish at that point, taking up that time, because I knew Critical Hit was just going to mop the floor with me without a weapon. So that's my event report for Battles at Maker Faire Orlando 2016. I leave with 2 functioning robots, even though they're not functioning particularly well, and a UK Ant that definitely needs a redesign or retirement. Definitely looking forward to 2017 and all the different events that are coming up. up. I know a Stuart Smallbots of Mass Destruction has been announced for February. I've heard rumblings of some other events down in Daytona, and honestly, I'm thinking about building something a little bigger and maybe traveling with it and competing like that. As for these guys, I actually really do want to rebuild Jack Chop. I love vertical spinners, and I think it would be really fun to get this thing working well and actually be able to compete with it. It also has very crappy armor on it, so I'd like to look into some other options to bring the weight down of the components and beef up the defense, just in case somebody gets around to the delicate parts. Sawin, I like the egg beater. I don't know if I'm actually going to keep running it though, just because I would rather have something of my own creation. I think I will keep the weapon kit itself though. I like the motor and speed controller combo, and the pulleys and everything worked pretty darn well, so even if I change out the weapon itself, I might keep the power behind it. I definitely want to get those brushless drive motors working well. I've got to figure out whatever the best way to get those pinions to stay in place is, because that's definitely a huge liability if they keep coming apart. And yeah, I think for 150 grams, I might go try to build something with a spinner, just because these are the first spinners I built in about a year. And while I love Gorgor and its ridiculous jaws and all that stuff, it's just really delicate, and wins with it aren't as satisfying as just ripping somebody to shreds. And I kind of missed ripping people to shreds, or at least trying to. So that's it for now, and I'll see you guys at the next event.